like some kind of a basics of what is containers, how to create Docker file, how to create images, and how to create containers. Now we have a concept of Docker networks. Before I go for a Docker networks, first we'll try to understand one development architecture called monolithic architecture and microservice architecture. Microservices architecture. It is nothing to do with Docker. It's nothing to do with the Docker, but it's somehow related to Docker. So now the application, whatever application, right, we can develop, that can be developed in two ways. Earlier, every project, they used to follow monolithic architecture. What is monolithic architecture? Right? Suppose if I take this example, you got one project. Suppose you got one project. Let me take one project like this, just to take an example. This application will have a multiple features, right? Multiple features. If you take Flipkart as an example, the application will have multiple features like login, registration, products, products catalog, or products, right? Add to cart, add payments, orders, something like this. So if you take any example like SBI, any application, it contains multiple features, multiple services. They will offer multiple services. If you take this as an example, people can develop this application in two architectures. One is monolithic and microservice. Monolithic architecture in the sense, this complete services, this complete project is going to be developed as a single entity. This complete features are part of same code base, single project. Suppose you have some version control tool like this, contains all the modules code, like it contains same project, single entity, login, registration, products, all the code. it will generate a single artifact, build artifact. This is going to generate a single build artifact, like a single package build artifact. This package has everything. This has all the modules code like login, registration, orders, everything, etc. So developed as a single entity or single code base. It will generate your CI/CD server, generates a single package. Package. So when it comes to deployment, like maybe this can be a var file or ER file, var or EAR, whatever it is. When it comes to deployment, this package we will deploy in servers, multiple servers. Our application real time, we will not deploy in a single server, we will deploy in a multiple servers. So here you have maybe some software, application server 1, this application server 2, and application server 3. Application server 2 and application server 3. So this package we will deploy here. And there will be a load balancer in front of our application server. There will be a load balancer in front of our application server. It will distribute the load to all these servers. End users will access via load balancer. End users will access via load balancer. So this application servers will connect to backend servers or database servers in the background. Database server. This application server will connect to database servers to insert or retrieve the data for this application. So this is kind of monolithic, right? All the features are packaged as a single entity, and that we used to deploy here. So what is the problem with this monolithic architecture? Why people started using microservice architecture? Right? So developer used to write a code and they used to commit. They will commit the code. These guys are developers. They will develop the code and they will commit the code. To the GitHub. They'll commit, write the code. They'll commit the code to the GitHub, and they, you can build and apply. But it looks very simple architecture. What is the problem here, right? The problem here is maintenance, scalability. Code maintenance and scalability. So what is the meaning of code maintenance, right? So this is very big project. You are trying to develop as a single code base, right? All the code you are maintaining here, right? And it is very hard to maintain the code for a large projects in a single entity. Suppose there is a small change, there is a small change in the some feature. There is a small change in the some feature like login. Can I only modify login can I only build and apply the login related code without compiling, testing, or deploying other modules if I follow this architecture? Because it's a single code base, single entity, right? So I need to compile, test, build the whole package. That package contains all the modules, not only login. You have to again compile, test, execute everything, all the features, because this contains all the features. It is tightly coupled. All the modules are tightly coupled with each other and they are in the same code base as a single entity. I cannot only make changes and only deploy the login code without impacting this one because it's a single code base. Now, scalability. What is the meaning of scalability? Suppose I want to scale only login and registration features because these services are mostly used, right? What is the meaning of it, right? Suppose you are using Flipkart application. Whenever you log in, right, are you going to place the orders? Let me take this way. Like, suppose there are 1 lakh people are using Flipkart application. They are logging into Flipkart. Does it mean all the 1 lakh users will place the orders? No, right? So I am getting a lot of requests. There is a lot of load on login features. There is a lot of load on registration features, but there is very less request for there are very less requests for orders and payments. The last pages, right? So I'm getting a lot of requests for Flipkart application only for login and registration features. Right? There are very less requests for like these services. So I want to scale. I want to scale my application. Will I able to support if there are lot of load with only these servers? Suppose there is a big billion day or something, right? There is a lot of requests coming. Let me take, I am getting 2 lakh requests to this application. It will distribute the load. It will distribute the load, something like this. Now there are a lot of requests. Will I able to handle these many requests with only minimal servers? I have to scale. So if I want to scale, I want to scale only these features because lot of requests are coming for this login, registration, products, but not for payments and orders, right? So will I able to scale only that feature if I follow monolithic architecture, or if I want to scale, I will end up scaling complete application or the complete, right? Since it's a single package, since it's a single package, we will end up scaling the complete application, not only that feature. We will end up scaling that complete application. So we will end up scaling the complete application. And also, can we develop the application like in a different programmatic language based on the features? Can I use the different programmatic languages based on my team capabilities and based on the features which will work for that module, based on the language features which it supports for that module or that feature? Can I use different programmatic languages based on the features it is going to offer for that specific module? In this case, no. It's a single code base. You have to stick to the same programmatic language. So this is the problem or challenges we have with monolithic architecture. So then people started using microservice architecture. In case of microservice architecture, each feature is developed as a separate entity, separate code base. So each module or each feature is developed as a separate entity or separate code base. So this is separate login related code as a separate small microservice. The name itself is saying microservice, very small. So each will be a separate code base, small project. It contains only login related code. It contains only registration related code, products related code, like checkout, only add to cart, payments, payments related code, orders related code. So this is microservice. There is no relation with Docker here, right? It is development architecture. Now each will generate a separate package. This is separate code base. So I will have a very small application package which contains only login related stuff, which contains only login related stuff like login.jar or whatever it is. So each contains its respective code. Its respective code. So it contains only registration. It contains only products related, payments related. I'm just taking Java as a programmatic language. So I'm just saying this package. Microservices can be developed in any programmatic language. So now each feature is a separate entity, separate code base. So it is easy to maintain the code, and I can, as an organization, I can have a team, a small team, which can focus on this area. I can have another small team, they can focus on this area, this feature, right? We can have a, distributed team which can focus on their areas, right? And whenever there is a change in this one, do we have any impact on this code? Because it's a separate code base altogether. Do we need to recompile, recreate these packages if there is a change in this one? Suppose there is a change in the login, right? Whatever team or developer is working on this module, he is modifying some code. Do we need to recompile and retest this feature? It's a separate code base, right? Not required. Easy maintenance. And scalability. What is scalability? Suppose there are a lot of requests coming for login and registration. Can I scale only these features? Can I increase the number of replicas for these application packages without scaling these features? We will increase number of replicas for these packages. There are advantages, but at the same time these are coming with some challenges. I will not say negatives, challenges. What are the challenges we have? Build and deployment. Second one, communication. What is communication? Communication between services. So we split this project into multiple services. One service has to So in case of microservice, databases also, what is the architecture, right? So this will have its own database. This will have its own database. This will have its own database. Okay. So each microservice will have a separate database. Databases also segregated based on the microservice. The problem here is the build and deployment and communication between services. At the end of the day, if I deploy only this service, does it work as an application, at the border picture? If I deploy only login, if I deploy only registration, does it mean our application will work, or I need to deploy the entire services, all the services? In my deployment servers, I need to deploy all the services as an application, as a whole application. We have to deploy all the services. Build and deployment. In a monolithic architecture, like how many packages we used to build and we used to deploy, like it's a single code base. We are building just one package. We are just building one package and we are deploying that package in a multiple servers for high availability and load balancing. But here, there are a lot of small services, right? So build and deployment. I have to build lot of small projects and deploy. This I can overcome, this build and deployment I can overcome using DevOps methodology. I like creating a CI/CD job, CI/CD pipeline or job for each microservice. Can we overcome this challenge by following DevOps methodology, like having a CI/CD setup for this application? Pipelines for each project. This is separate job. This is a separate job. This is a separate job, which will build and deploy. But coming to the deployment also, infrastructure cost. Earlier, all the features are part of single code base. So we used to deploy as a package in this server. Suppose I have these many packages now, like approximately 7 packages. If you take 7 packages, I have to deploy. Now, if I want to deploy this package, each replica, right, at least one replica, how many servers I need if I go for a servers? How many virtual machines I need if I go for a virtual machines? If I use virtualization, I have a 7 packages to deploy. If I want to deploy at least one replica, if I want to deploy at least one replica, if I use virtualization, virtual machine directly, to deploy one replica, how many servers I need minimum? You may have a question, sir, why can't we deploy in a single server? Sir, why can't you deploy this in a single server? What is the problem, right? What we discussed, why we should not deploy in a single server? We have to isolate. We have to isolate this process. So now, to deploy only one replica, I need a 7 virtual machines. But do I need a virtual machine? Right? We are wasting our resources. We are wasting our resources. Right? If I go for a virtualization, Do I need a virtual machine to deploy this small microservice? Do I need entire system to deploy this small microservice? So this is where containerization helps. This is where containerization helps, right? And also, if I use machines, again the problem is configuration of your machines, right? I need to first set up the machine to run this package, the required softwares, required environment. So that is where containerization helps. Containerization will shine for a microservice architecture. Containerization will shine for a microservice architecture. So what we can do now, we can create packages, another package. If I go for a containerization, what can we do? You have a Docker file for this project, you have a Docker file for this code base. We can create a Docker image. Docker image. So it contains only login related code, and it's a software. Suppose if it is a jar file, we will have a Java base. So each microservice we will Dockerize. Each microservice we will Dockerize. We will create a Docker file out of that package. As part of your CI/CD process, you can create a Docker image. So then we will push these images to artifactories, basically repositories, that is fine. Now, if I want to deploy Docker image, do I need multiple servers or can I manage with minimal servers? I don't need these many servers, 7 servers, right? For single replica, I can have some server, Docker servers. I can have some Docker servers. It's very important how we are using Docker in our projects, right? If I have to use Docker, if you have to use Docker, if you have to Dockerize, can you Dockerize without Docker file? Can you Dockerize without Docker file for your project? You need to write a Docker file. You need to write a Docker file. So you should know the Docker background. What is containerization? What is virtualization? How containerization is helping in a microservice architecture. And if I have to Dockerize this application, you should know how to write a Docker file and how to create images and how to deploy the containers. So now I have some servers, maybe like 2 servers or 3 servers. This I will run as one container. This I will deploy as one container. This is login container. I can deploy registration container. From other image. Registration container, orders container, payment container, something like this. Based on my system capacity, I can run some containers. Orders container, payment container, like checkout. payments, products, something like this. So if there is a lot of load, if there is a lot of load, there is a lot of load on login. Will I able to scale only login container now? So there is a lot of load on login. Lot of people are accessing login. Will I able to scale only login now? Instead of one container, can I run this one as a two replicas? Instead of one replica, can I run as two replicas? Am I scaling the entire application now? If there is a lot of load on this, am I scaling only this feature, or am I scaling the entire feature now, like entire project? Only the specific feature, specific microservice, right? Now, whenever there is a change in the login, there is some enhancement in the login. Do I need to redeploy, rebuild entire application, or can I only build and deploy this login related stuff in microservice architecture? So whenever there is a change, right, your CI/CD job will take the latest code. It will create a latest package. You can remove old containers of your login, and you can deploy the latest containers, right? Latest, updated. So now build and deployment, we are overcoming with CI/CD. Resource utilization or optimization. Resource utilization, we are achieving using containers, right? So instead of having multiple servers, right, within the given infrastructure, I'm trying to maximize my resource utilization. We are trying to maximize our resource utilization or infrastructure cost. Infrastructure cost. We are trying to achieve using containers. Now, communication between services. What is the meaning of communication between services, right? At the end of the day, login related service, login related code has to communicate with products. Products might have to communicate with payments, orders, right? One service has to communicate with other service. These are related applications, right? So is it working on its own, right? Is it's working on its own, but this is depends on this one. This is depends on this one. So whenever you log in, once the login is successful, maybe login has to communicate with products. The checkout has to communicate with products, orders, payments, right? Communication. Communication is a challenge here, right? So each container will have an IP address and its port. And this container can talk to this container on this IP and port. Each container will have its own port, your application port, on which port that application is running. And each container will have a IP address. And I want to isolate the networks also. I want to isolate the networks also now. I have isolated the process. Now this process is running as a separate. This is running as a separate process. Now if there is any impact on this one, if there is any impact on this registration container, something went wrong in this container, will it affect the other containers? We have isolated the process now, so there is no impact. But at the same time, networks, communication, right? This is having its own IP and port. This is having its own IP and port. It can communicate with each other, provided what, guys? This guy can communicate with this guy, provided if they are in a same what? If they are in a same network. If they are in a same network. So that is where Docker networks comes into picture. Container networks. Right? Even though the containers are running in the same machine, which doesn't mean this container can communicate with this container unless until they are in a same network. And service discovery. We call it as a service discovery. What is the meaning of service discovery, right? So we are in a container world. We are living in a container world. Each container will have its own IP. But can we use IPs for a communication internally? Can developer who is developing this application, this code, can he go with the IPs of the containers? We are living in a container world. Container IPs are dynamic. Container IPs are dynamic. Can we depend on the IP address of the containers? Container IPs are dynamic. Developer cannot, suppose this guy want to communicate with this guy. So in the code, we should not depend on the IP address. Container IPs are dynamic. IPs keeps changing. And if I have a multiple containers for the same module, I need some kind of a load balancing. Suppose login has multiple containers. This guy has to communicate with login. If I have a multiple containers, I need some kind of a load balancing. So that is where this container orchestration tools comes into picture, like a Docker Swarm for a load balancing. But here, for container communication, I no need to depend on the IP address. If they are in a same network, in a custom network, one container can communicate with another container using container name. So container communication can happen using container names. So we can use a Docker network concept. If they are in a same network, this container can communicate with this container using container name in a normal Docker. In case of Docker Swarm, we can use service name. Now, do we have a control on the service names or containers names? While creating a container, do you have a control on the names? Can you give whatever name you want to give and use the same name for a communication? And use the same name for a communication, right? Now, I can implement microservice architecture without Dockers also, without containerizations, but Docker shines for a microservice architecture. We are trying to leverage whatever features are there in a Docker for implementing microservice architecture. So Docker shines for a microservice architecture. We can build and deploy each service as a separate image container. If these containers are same, they're in a same network, one container can communicate with another container using Docker networks. So if you observe why Docker and Kubernetes is very demand in the DevOps tool set because of the microservice architecture. So why there is a lot of demand for Dockers and Kubernetes from last 2-3 years? If you observe, there is a lot of demand for the people, the guys who has a skill set of Dockers and Kubernetes because of microservice architecture. Whatever projects recently they have started or developing, right? All the projects are following microservice architecture. So that is where we are using these tools to build and deploy our applications as a containers. Now, we are still only discussing about Docker. We have not discussed about Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, right? So what is that? I'll come to that. I'll come to that point later. We are still only discussing about Docker, only containerization. We have not yet started what is container orchestration. So the challenge here is with only containerization. You are creating a containers. If your containers went wrong, you are creating containers. If your containers went wrong, this container is down for some reason. This container is stopped. Now, if I use only Docker, is it coming up automatically? Is it creating another replica? I am using containerization. These containers, I have a lot of containers. If containers are down, are we getting the containers automatically? Is it replicating? Does anyone is replicating automatically? If this container is down for some reason, am I getting another container? No, right? And scaling. What is the meaning of scaling? I have created one container. I want to scale to another, two containers, three containers for the same service. Now, are we able to scale in only Docker? Scaling and load balancing? No, right? That is where container orchestration comes into picture. That is where container orchestration comes into picture, like a Docker Swarm, Kubernetes, or OpenShift, Misios. These are the container orchestration tools. So that we will discuss later, right? What is container orchestration, how to set up container orchestration. That we will discuss in advanced classes. Now let's try to understand the networks. Now we deployed some applications. We created some images in our Docker servers. So Docker has by default normal Docker. Docker by default, Docker has three networks. Three default networks. So we have three types of networks by default. Three networks. One is bridge, host, and none. Bridge, host, none. These are the networks by default. So while creating a container, did we mention under which Docker network that container has to be created? So far you have executed this command, right? -d, -p, -name, container name. We have used image name. So did we mention the network name under which network the container has to be created? So by default, in a normal Docker server, we have those three networks. So under which network this will be deployed by default if we don't mention the network in a normal Docker machine? If you observe, let me show that. Let me connect to some Docker server. Let me show that. So if you see, by default, Docker network ls. So how many networks are there? And its driver, network name and its driver. So we have a bridge network. Name is bridge, driver is bridge driver, network driver, host network, none network. So if I create a container, let me see if I have any container. Yes, I have this container. This container is created in this machine. So under which network, under which Docker network this container is running? We have not mentioned the network name while creating a container. How can I know under which network this container is running? Your commands knowledge now. How can I know under which network this container is running? Can I inspect the container? Docker inspect or container inspect? You can do something like this: Docker container inspect or directly Docker inspect your container name or ID. If you see the networks for your container, under which network, if you see, under which network this container is running? Bridge, right? This is the network ID. This is the network ID. This one. It has very long ID, but when we see here, it will display only very less number of characters. This is the network ID. And what is the IP address of this network? Basically, this container, this one, 172.17.0.2. So under which network the container is running? Bridge network by default. We call it as a default bridge. We call it as a default bridge. This we call it as a default bridge. We call it as a default bridge. Now, let me create another container. Let me create another container from a different image. So, did I mention the network name in my command? Like, am I asking Docker to create this container in some network, specific network? No. So again, this will be created in, that default bridge network. So now I have a two containers. This is also running in default bridge. This is also running in default bridge. Now developer will write a code, service to service communication. Like he will write a code, like he will invoke some REST API, right? But the problem here is, will it able to communicate with this one if it is in a different network? Basically, for container to container communication, you will not use port. Do I need to do the port binding, guys? If I want to access, container to container communication, do I need to do the port binding? Port forwarding, not required. That is for only external access. One container can communicate with another container using container IP and container port. You don't need a port binding or port mapping. Now, if this container is running in a different network, will it able to communicate with each other? No. Now both are running in a same network, default bridge. Let me inspect this one also. This is the IP address of this. Now I have one Docker server. Some operating system, host operating system. Now on top of that, I have a Docker, and there are some containers. Now I deployed I have two containers. This is one container. Just to take an example, Maven web app container. This is another container. Both are running on 8080. This is 8080. This is also on 8080 container port. Now this IP address is, this guy IP address is something else. This guy container IP, this IP is 172.17.0.3. This guy IP is 0.2. Now both are running in same network. Docker network. Under which network these two are running? Both containers are running in a default bridge network. I can have n number of containers in this network. Default bridge network. So how it will work, right? In the default bridge network, one container can communicate with another container only using IP. In a default bridge network, IPs only will work. Like your container's name will not work. So in default bridge network, container to container communication will happen only using IP in a default bridge. So this guy can access this guy using IP and port, right? Suppose this if you are aware about the services, right? If you are from a development background, from a development background, if you are from a development background, there is a concept of APIs, REST APIs, RESTful APIs, right? So this service has to invoke some service in this API, REST APIs. So there is some API which we exposed here. This has to be accessed from this service. They can access using this port and this IPs or names, right? Now the problem here is in a default bridge network, this can access or this can communicate with this one or this can communicate with this one using only IP address. How can I check whether this guy is able to access this guy or not? Now, how can I verify whether this container can communicate with this container or this container can communicate with this container? How can I prove that? Will it work? So we can go inside the container. Can we ping the other container? Can I go inside the container and can I try to ping this container if it works or not? Guys, I want to prove whether this container will be able to communicate with this container. Now I have two containers. Now I want to prove there is no code as of now. As of now, there is no code which will access this one or this will access this one. But I want to prove. So I can go inside one of the container. I can go inside one of the container. Let me go inside this. Let me go inside this. Now let me ping. Am I able to access using name in this network? Now I am trying to ping using name, the container name basically. Because this is default bridge network, we cannot communicate using names. But if I try to ping using IP, now am I able to communicate with this container? This container IP is this one. Am I able to communicate? Do you see the data is getting exchanged? The packets is getting transferred. So this is default bridge network behavior. But can I depend on the IPs, guys? Suppose I have a database container. My database also has a container. Suppose I have a database, like maybe Mongo database, MySQL database. I have a database also as a container. Now, this application container has to talk to the database container. Developer will write the code, but can developer depends on the IP address of your database container? Suppose if he use the IP address, suppose if I deploy this same application in a different Docker server, different environment, do you guarantee that you will get the same IP address for your database, right? So there is a, we will not get the same IPs, right? And again, we should not hard code something which is dynamic. We should not hard code something which is dynamic. So developer also has to follow some standards, environment specific values like database, usernames, passwords, some kind of a environment specific for each and every environment. If something is getting changed, developers also should not hard code inside the application. They can externalize, maybe they can expect as an environment variable. They can expect as an environment variable. Can we pass environment variables while creating a containers? Suppose if developer is expecting that database username, password, or maybe database, URL. If developer is expecting as an environment variable inside the code, while creating a container, can we pass so that you have a control on the environment specific variables also? So developer should not hard code something which is dynamic, like a IP address of the containers. IPs are dynamic, and if you have multiple containers, right, there should be some different approach. So now that is where custom networks comes into picture. Now I have a default bridge network. Can I create my own bridge network? Now, custom bridge. I can create my own bridge network. I can execute something like this. Docker network create -d driver hyphen name, network name also you can give, or directly you can give name. I can create something like this, my own bridge network. I can directly give a name, network name. If I don't mention -d, guys, while creating a networks and volumes, -d is not detached. When I use -d while creating a container, it is detached. When I'm using -d while creating a networks and volumes, what does it mean? What is the meaning of -d? The driver, the network driver or volume driver. So if I don't mention the driver, under which driver it will use in this normal Docker? If I don't mention -d, which driver it will use? Under which? Bridge driver. It will use bridge driver to create the network. While creating a network, guys, I am saying while creating a network, if I don't mention -d bridge, it will use bridge only. Now, I can create my own network. As of now, I have only these networks. Docker network ls. If you see Docker network help command, so far we executed this one, Docker network ls. It will display the number of networks. Now, if required, what can I do? I can use this Docker network create. Docker network create. Guys, network has a CIDR concept, the network range, right? So if required, I can give a network range also for this network, or Docker will incrementally take the CIDR for that network. So let me do that. Docker network create. If I don't mention this also, it will use the bridge driver only. Let me say something like this. Flipkart network or Flipkart bridge. Now I got a, sorry. Now I got my own bridge network. This we call it as a custom bridge, which you created. I can inspect the network also, guys. Docker network, inspect. Network name or ID. We got a different range for this network. What is the network range for other one? The default one? For the default one, what is the network range we have? This. We got a different network range for this. Guys, this is your network range, CIDR. We call it as a CIDR, classless interdomain routing. It's a method for allocating the IP address and its routing. In VPC, we discussed, right? In VPC, we discussed in AWS VPC, right? So similarly, like a server network, we have a within the server, there is a Docker networks. Within the server, we have a Docker networks. So this is the range for your containers, not for your servers. This is your container networks, not your server networks. In AWS, when we discussed, did we discuss subnets, right? Based on this range, right? How many you can run based on this range. You can give whatever. Suppose if I give something like this, I can customize, guys. While creating a network, you can give your own range. But do you need to do this? If there is a requirement saying that in the Docker network, you have to create only less servers, less containers, you can customize. There is an option. You can give 24, 28, something like this. There is an option. When we are creating a network, there is an option. If you see, sorry, this I have to use -help. If you see, there is an option, subnet, -subnet. You can give like how many, what is the range? Like you have a IP range and subnet, right? So you can use these options so that you can define your own range. Otherwise, Docker will randomly use the network range. So now we got a different network. Let me remove this one. Again, guys, can we remove the network if there are active containers in that network? No. So now I have this network, custom network, this one. Now, if the containers are created in a custom network, if the containers are created in a custom bridge network, will it able to communicate with each other using names? Basically, your container name, that is the DNS name for your container. Suppose if I have created a network, if I have created a custom bridge network, if I have created a custom bridge network, container to container communication can happen using name and also IP. IP is in custom bridge. This is also one interview question, guys. What is the difference between default bridge network and custom bridge network in Docker? And if I don't mention the network, under which network containers will be created by default? So if I create a containers in custom bridge network, I can access each other using names. So let me do this, guys. Let me remove these containers because we have very less CPU and memory. I will remove these containers and again I will create. So now let me create a container. Docker run -d. If you want to access outside, then only port binding is required. In normal Docker. So let me create some container. Now I want this container to be created in that Flipkart bridge network. I want this container to be created in a Flipkart bridge network. If I don't mention under which network it will create, default bridge. Why we should not use Shravani? Why we should not use in a default? What is the problem in the default? Guys, what is the problem for a container to container communication in the default? So IPs are dynamic. So you cannot depend on the IPs for service to service communication, and you cannot communicate using the name, service name or host name, right? So if your IP is changed again, if you are using other services using IP inside the code, again they have to modify the code and again they have to deploy. Because IPs are dynamic, container IPs are dynamic. If IPs are getting changed again, you need to modify your code and deploy again. But that is not expected. So now, how can I inform this guy, Docker, to deploy this container in a Flipkart network? There is an option, -, network, your network name. What is my network name which I have created? Flipkart bridge. This is the option you have to use, -, network space your network name. Guys, order doesn't matter. You can mention -, network here also, next to the run. So order doesn't matter. You have to give, but before the image, this is the last. So -, network, this network. Now container is created. If I inspect, under which network now this container is running? This Flipkart bridge. If you see, the IP is different. So this is the IP address of this guy. Different network, so different range. Now let me create a one more container from a different image. This is also I am creating in a same network Flipkart bridge. If I want to access, I can do the port mapping, otherwise you can leave it. Now this container also running in same custom bridge network. So what is the IP address of this guy? This is the IP address. Now let me go inside one of these containers. Maybe this one or this one. Port mapping is not required if you don't want to access outside, like Only container to container communication, you don't need a port mapping. Suppose if you want to access from outside, then only I need a port mapping. For container to container communication, not required. Because you are directly talking to the container, you are not talking to the host. Container to container communication, you are directly talking to the container, not talking to the host. So port mapping is not required for container to container communication. So now let's go inside one of the container. Let me go inside one of the containers. Let me see what are my container names. Let me go inside this. Let me ping others. Now here 172.18.0.3. Now is it able to communicate with IP? And also let me try to communicate with the name. Is it able to resolve the IP address of that host, basically the name? Now is container to container communication is happening using the name? So you have a control on the names, service names or host name. You have a control on the names like service name or host name. So container to container communication, we can use names instead of IPs. Now let me press Ctrl C. Let me come out. Suppose if I create a container in another network, if I create a container in another network, if I create a container in another network, these are not like within that range, right? You have a Docker network. While creating a network, you have given the range, private IPs, private range, right? So while creating a Docker network, there is a range for that Docker network IPs. Within that range, these IPs will be allocated. The networking concept. So each time container IPs may change. If you delete the container, if I recreate the container, it doesn't mean we will get the same IP for that container. Suppose there is already 10 containers. One container went down, and if you create another, if you recreate the container, IP may change. You will not get the same IP, whatever we had initially for that container. So these IPs are from within that network range, Docker network range. So now let me create a container in another network. I am trying to create a container in another network. Docker run hyphen name. I am trying to create a container in another network. Like from maybe some image. I'll directly create a container from just to demonstrate from a Tomcat image. I have not done the port mapping. I have not given the name of the container, and I have not given the network also. Under which network this will be created? Sorry, I have not given -D also. I should have given -D. Interactive mode is coming. So test is already there. Let me give test one. Now, will I able to communicate to these containers from this one using IP? Will I able to communicate from this container? Will I able to access these two using container IP or name? IP or name? Can I access using IP? If you understand the concept, this is in a different Docker network. This is in a different Docker network. Will I able to access? So these two containers are running in which network? These two containers are running in a Flipkart bridge network. And this container, default network. Default network. Network itself is changed. How come you will get the same CIDR, same range, right? It is a different range. This is running in a different network. This is running in a different network. So basically, it's not possible. You cannot communicate from this container. You cannot access these two containers using names or IPs. This is running in a different network. This is running in a different network. Are you able to access using name or IP, whatever it is? Right? Not possible, because that is in a different network. So you can isolate your applications in a Docker process level and also network level also. Suppose you want to support some other application of the same client, but that should not have access to these containers. Then you can create a separate network for that application as well. This is bridge and custom bridge. Then what is host network? What is none network? So there are two more networks. Host network and none network. So what is host? The name itself is saying host. What is the meaning of host here? What is the meaning of host? The server, your host machine. Now I can create a container directly on the host network. I can directly create a containers on the host network instead of Docker network. If I directly create a container on a host network, can I do I need to do the port mapping or port binding? If I directly create container on a host network, you are directly creating on a host network. But what is the problem? Can I have a two containers on a host network if the container port is same? Can I create two containers on a host network if container port is same? Suppose, can I create a Jenkins container and Tomcat container together in a same server in a host network? Because you are creating a containers in a host network, you will get a port conflict. So you cannot create two containers on a same host network. Guys, like a VPC peering, like a VPC peering, question in default network as well as custom network, IPs are dynamic, then why containers are not pingable using container name? Harship, you are aware about networks? Are you aware about networks? So if containers, not forget about containers, let's take a servers itself. You have a servers in two different networks. Can you communicate with IPs? Basically, can you access each other? Server one in one network, server two in other network. So here, what is Docker network? Basically here, within the same server, you have a two separate networks. Container these two containers are in one network, this is in another network. So will you able to access these containers from here? Docker networks. That is why we will not able to access with each other. In default network, why it is not, communication will not happen using container names? Because there is no DNS component attached to the default network. When you create, when Docker comes to, when we install Docker, Docker is having a default network. The DNS is not created basically for that network. So you cannot resolve the names. When we create a custom network, so there will be a DNS component attached to that network, so it can resolve the IPs using the names. That is the default behavior. So when we are creating a host network, already host network is there, the server network, directly the host network, the server network. If containers we create in a host network, there is no Docker network. It will be directly running on your server network. We cannot have two containers on a same port in a host network. You are not getting a network namespace if you create in a host network. So the containers will be directly running on a host network. So let me show that. So let me show that. Docker run -d -name, something like this, -network host network. Let me give some image name. I am not doing port mapping also. There is a typo. Docker hands-on. Now I got a container. I am able to access without doing the port mapping also. I am able to access without doing the port mapping, port binding. That is because of what? How come I am able to access? If you say I am able to access, that is because of the network. Under which network that container is running now? Guys, please be on mute. Divakar. In the host network. Now, if I inspect the container, do I have an IP address for the container? Will I get an IP address for the container in a host network? Because your container is directly running on the host. So you don't have an IP in host network. Now, can I create another container on a host network if the container, if this image port is also same? Now will I able to create? Now if you see, after some time, just wait for some time. Why container is stopped? What is the problem? How can we check? Divakar, I am muting, you from my side again. You are like,
Sir, it's not unmuting. Sorry.
so now if you see, if you see, that is stopped. Why it is stopped? If you see the logs, if you see the logs, for that container. What is the problem here? Address already in use. So this is host network, right? Can I create our own host network, guys? Can we create our own host network the way I created a bridge network? Can I create our own host network? Host network and none network only one instance, right? You cannot create your own host network in a Docker. You cannot create your own none network. And again, what is none network? There is no network at all for your container. There is no network at all for your container. You cannot access container to container communication also will not happen. From outside also you cannot access. But which one we will use in real time? Will we, do we use host network? Do we use none network? Or do we use bridge again, custom bridge or default bridge? There is another network called overlay. There is another network called overlay. So what is overlay? Why we will use overlay? That we will discuss when we go for a Docker swarm, guys. What is the problem with bridge, custom bridge, right? In real time, we will not have only one server. In real time, we will not have only one server. Our containers will be distributed in multiple Docker servers. Our containers will be distributed in multiple Docker servers. We cannot create a bridge. We cannot create a bridge between multiple Docker machines. This is not possible. We cannot create a bridge between multiple Docker servers. What is the bridge network scope? The bridge network scope is within this server. The bridge network scope is within this server. Suppose I have a multiple Docker servers. This container has to communicate with this container, which is running on a different host. That is where we need a overlay network. So what is overlay? How to create overlay networks? We will discuss in a Docker swarm. We will discuss in a Docker swarm. So do we have any scenarios for none network? Suppose you are having some kind of a batch job or batch processing. You are having some kind of a batch job or batch processing. No one should access that process, but it will do it work. It will do it work, right? So those kind of scenarios, you can have a none network. That is based on your requirement, right? So as per my experience, I have not created any containers in a none networks, but if you have a scenario, kind of a batch job, it will not communicate with any other service. It will do its job. In that case, we can apply that in a overlay network. So this is about network, guys. There is a detailed video, same thing, whatever I discussed today. It is already there in our YouTube channel. Just go through that one more time. Anyhow, I will share the recording. Same topic we already uploaded here, microservice, monolithic and Docker networks. So go through this video. Tomorrow we will continue with very important topic, volumes. Tomorrow we will continue with very important topic, volumes. So try to practice whatever we discussed. Using Docker, can't we communicate with a different network? Like in AWS, we have a VPC pairing. Here also you have a concept. There is an option, Docker Network Connect. You can mention the container network name and container ID. You can attach container to another network. So this is running in a different network. You can connect to this network also. So then this container will be part of this network. So you can connect container to the multiple networks by executing this Docker network connect, Docker network disconnect. You can disconnect. If this is running in a default bridge, you can connect to custom bridge also. That is possible, Sharvanan, by using Docker network connect, Docker network disconnect. You can connect your container to more than one network. Okay, guys, we'll continue tomorrow. Try to complete the assignments. Okay, I am here to help you when we are here, right? I am trying to explain all the concepts and we are trying to give some assignments. If you are not able to do, I am here to help you. But once your batch is done, you might be busy with some other priorities. I might be busy with some other priorities, other batches, right? So since I am here, since I am available here for you, right? Try to practice, try to create, complete the assignments. I am here to help you. But once again, like if I am done with this batch, I may start other batches. I will be busy with other batches and you will be busy with your priorities. You cannot practice. Try to practice when we are discussing here. Try to complete the assignments. And I am here to help you. Okay? So whoever completed the assignment, try to share with me in WhatsApp or Skype, wherever you are. Right? I'll try to go through and provide my feedback, guys. Thank you. We'll continue tomorrow.